Hey guys, thanks for checking out this clip of Anatomy of the Church and State. Be sure to catch the full episode on Rumble or ChristiansForLiberty.com. Links are in the show description.
Uh, our last guy that I want to cover, I was only going to cover two, but I think I'll quickly cover another Revolutionary War pastor, Simeon Howard. Now, I'll briefly talk about him. He was a parish who resided in Boston, which is, right at the epicenter of where the revolution began. So he was right in the middle of it all as it was happening. And he's not quite as famous as the first two that we had discussed, but he also preached a sermon that I will read another excerpt from that I think rings true to what we are experiencing today. Now, he was born. I don't even have any pictures to show you. That's how little is known about his details about his past. There's no portraits. There's really nothing on this guy except copies of his sermons, which you can find online. I highly suggest reading the whole thing. They are really good sermons, both from Samuel Langdon and this guy Simeon Howard, who was born in 1733. He was also a graduate of Harvard, and he earned his living as a teacher before becoming a theologian. Now, not long after becoming pastor of the West Church in Boston, he and many of his parishioners were forced to flee to Nova Scotia because the British Army were starting to turn private homes into barracks because the war was breaking out. Upon his return, 18 months later, he found most of his congregation had fled. So he had to build his congregation basically from scratch because only 3 families out of his entire congregation were left. So Simeon is by no means, like I said, as notorious as the previous 2 pastors we just covered, but he preached a sermon in 1780 I think we can all learn from. In fact, besides his sermon, you're not going to find much information about the guy, but you will find his sermons, and you will find most of them that he preached around this time of the Revolution to be pretty impactful. In fact, you could replace Great Britain, the term Great Britain, in a lot of these sermons with our own government to these days. Our own government isn't coming at us with muskets and cannons and warships, but they are, DOJs, FBI, censorship, surveillance. We are being attacked in ways in which are only going to get worse. Yeah, so it's an important sermon, that this one I'm about to read, because it outlines the qualifications that every ruler of countries should have, a biblical checklist, if you will. Significantly, the Constitution of Massachusetts had been written shortly before this sermon and was ratified 1 month after the sermon. The 1780 Massachusetts Constitution is actually today still in effect the only constitution older than the U.S. Constitution that's still around today. The premise for the content of this sermon is the book of Exodus, and I'd like to read an excerpt, if you guys don't mind, before we get out of here. One more, and this one is titled, "Being the Anniversary for the Election of the Honorable Council" by Simeon Howard. Let us now consider the qualifications pointed out in the text as necessary for rulers. 1. They must be able men. God has made a great difference in men in respect of their natural powers, both of body and mind. To some he has given more, to others fewer talents. Nor is there perhaps a less difference in this respect arising from education. And though there are none but what may be good members of civil society, as well as faithful servants of God, yet every one has not abilities sufficient to make him a good civil ruler. Woe unto thee, O land, when thy king is a child, says Solomon, hereby intimating that the happiness of a people depends greatly upon the character of its rulers. And if they resemble children in weakness, ignorance, credulity, fickleness, etc., the people will of course be very miserable. Sidebar, can you think of who that might apply to ruling our country today? By able men may be intended men of good understanding and knowledge, men of clear heads who have improved their minds by exercise, acquired a habit of reasoning, and furnished themselves with a good degree of knowledge. Another sidebar, how much reasoning has been thrown out the window lately? Men who have a just conception of the nature and end of government in general, of the natural rights of mankind, of the nature and importance of civil and religious liberty, a knowledge of human nature, of the springs of action, and the readiest way to engage and influence the heart, an acquaintance with the people to be governed, their genius, their prejudices, their interest with respect to other states, what difficulties they are under, what dangers they are liable to, and what they are able to bear and do. By able men may be further intended men capable of enduring the burden and fatigue of government, men that have not broken or debilitated their bodies or minds by the effeminating pleasures of luxury, intemperance, or dissipation. The supreme government of a people is always a burden of great weight, though more difficult at some times than others. It cannot be managed well without great diligence and application. Weak and effeminate persons are therefore by no means fit to manage it. Who are you thinking of right now that is effeminate and weak and unable to manage what's going on? Just saying. But rulers should not only be able men, but such as fear God. The fear of God, in the language of Scripture, does not intend a slavish, superstitious dread as of an almighty, arbitrary, and cruel being, but that just reverence and awe of him which naturally arises from belief and habitual consideration of his glorious perfections and providence, of his being the moral governor of the world, a lover of holiness and a hater of vice, who sees every thought and design as well as every action of all his creatures, and will punish the vicious and reward the virtuous. I think that's important to think of God in that way. Most secular folks think of our God as some kind of dread, like he said, an arbitrary and cruel being, when it's actually quite the opposite. He goes on, "It is therefore a fear of offending him, productive of obedience to his laws, and ever accompanied with hope in his mercy, and that filial love which is due to so amiable a character. Let me observe once more that it is of great importance to their happiness that religion and virtue generally prevail among a people, and in order to this, government should use its influence to promote them." A lot of love of self going on in our country, and that makes one a little bit selfish. He goes on, "For they must be men of truth. This means men free from deceit and hypocrisy, guile and falsehood, men who will not, by flattery and cajoling, by falsehood and slandering a competitor, endeavor to get into authority, and who, when they are in, will conscientiously speak the truth in all their declarations of promise and punctually fulfill all their engagements." I think that last part speaks to the vast majority of politicians who are not free from deceit, who are hypocritical, who do whatever they can to get in office, and once they get in, don't care about the people. We elect too many of these people, and because too many of these people are not real Christians and are far from God, I think. So anyways, it's a very long sermon. I recommend checking out the whole thing, because he goes through a giant checklist of all kinds of that was just a brief overview of some of the things he goes down the checklist for what qualifies as a good ruler. But that's all I got for you guys today. I just wanted to cover and let you guys know that there was a time that pastors were actively engaged in speaking about politics. They were actively engaged in defending our freedom and liberty, and they are no longer actively engaged in such things, and we need to push our church leaders to be. This whole idea that church and state have to be so separate that we can't even talk about it is absolutely ridiculous.